that's just another thing people should consider, is that it might not actually be cheaper to hire someone who has a lower rate.
Now, one of the things, as you probably know, is that like attorneys they're not cheap. They're expensive, and I think it definitely scares people away.
Definitely.
From like reaching out to an attorney. And I'm curious if you can get help, like people that are thinking about getting an attorney, like from a cost perspective, like how, because sometimes it's scary, like how much are they going to pay? Can you kind of give like your insight in terms of like the cost, in terms of like what would one expect to pay like an attorney, like how much that might be?
That's a really good question, and I would say that's the number one question I get, actually, is how much everything's going to cost. And what I always tell people is you can't know, because most attorneys bill by the hour, and you can't tell at the beginning of a project how long that case is going to take, because it could be something that's resolved pretty quickly, and it could take 2-3 years, especially if it goes through a final trial. At a minimum, that'll probably take 3 years. So it's hard to tell, but I think one thing I would tell people is that, especially at the onset of a project, such as signing the contract, stages like that, the money you would invest in having an attorney review your contracts and help you put that together, or at least know what you're getting into, is well worth it, because that will be extremely cheap compared to the money you might have to spend on the back end to fix a problem later. And that's a long way of saying, basically, it's a cheaper fix to address an issue before the issue becomes an issue than it is to have to correct it after there's already a problem. So I definitely think people at the onset, when they're signing a contract or getting into a purchase, should not be afraid to spend the money at that part, to just have it reviewed and know their rights and know what they're getting themselves into, because that generally should only be a few $100s to have a contract review. If you're going to get into deep litigation, that can easily get into the hundreds of thousands of dollars, definitely. So I think it's just a conversation you need to have with your attorney at the onset about where they could see those fees going, because it's going to vary from case to case. But at least an initial doc review, anytime anyone signs pretty much any contract, they should spend the money to sit down with an attorney and go through it, because that's going to be cheaper than it would be if they had a problem later. Okay,
so the kind of the two takeaways I got was, one is to really find out is you just have to talk with the attorney and kind of just ask them the questions of, like, ask them to do a review of the case, and they can kind of give you, okay, this is where I think the direction of like what it might cost and how long it might take.
Yeah, exactly.
So and then the other thing, a big thing you mentioned as well, it's better to spend money on the front end to make sure the contract is written well and written in the way that like both parties see fit, rather than waiting later and we have a problem and then you're just having to spend, it's just a lot more problems later.
Exactly. And I think the other thing too, some people get turned off by different rates of attorneys. So usually attorneys who've been licensed less will have a lower hourly rate, and attorneys who've been licensed longer have a higher hourly rate, just because of the breadth of experience. I think sometimes people get a little shy when they see those fees, and they're like, well, that guy's charging, $500 an hour, and that other person's charging $200 an hour. I'm going to use the $200 an hour person because, they're going to be cheaper for me. And that may be true. And there's plenty of attorneys who are new and have lower billing rates who are great attorneys, but the dollar amount per hour is not a pride thing. It's a experience thing. And so something that might take the lower fee attorney 3-4 hours to take, a lot of times the higher fee attorney might take them like 1 hour. So that's just another thing people should consider, is that it might not actually be cheaper to hire someone who has a lower rate. Okay.
So it's good that you brought that up, because I was curious as to how does like someone go about like choosing an attorney? Like because like you said, some of the things I might look at is like their cost, because I mean, like you said, the more they charge, there's a good chance they have more experience. But like, say if you're looking for a construction attorney, what are kind of like good things to do or check before like choosing one?
The number one thing I tell people is ask your friends, like ask your people who you physically know and who you trust if they've ever had to use an attorney for this type of issue, or if they know someone who's used an attorney, and get a personal referral that way, because that's I think the most comforting experience people can have is if their attorney they're hiring is either someone who they know has been used by someone who they know, or someone who a friend of a friend has used, someone who basically there's a tangible connection where you can be like, okay, well, yeah, I know that person is good because I know the work they did and I know someone who did it. That's a really good way. But a lot of times, especially with construction, that's more of a niche issue, so it might be a little bit harder to find someone that way. So I would say the other way to do it is to reach out to your networks and ask, who do you guys know for this? Google is definitely a good way to look up attorneys. You're going to find attorneys, but everyone should just remember, those first few names that pop up, those are people who paid the money to have themselves come up. It doesn't necessarily mean they're the greatest ones. Okay. But I would say definitely checking out people's reviews online. Sometimes, of course, there can always be, trolls who go and post mean reviews, but there's a website called Avvo, AVVO.
Okay.
Every single attorney, avvo.com, every single attorney in the U.S. automatically has a page on there once they're licensed, and you can see client reviews on there, and that's a good place to look for reviews to see how attorneys are getting reviews. I don't think Yelp is a good source because I've learned that they tend to bury a lot of 5-star reviews for people.
I'm aware of that.
Yeah. So Yelp, I think, pretty much discard that. That website's crazy. Google reviews, I think, tend to be a little more accurate. I think one thing to be aware of those that, of course, anyone who has a Google account can leave it. So you never know if it's a real accurate review. It's just good to look at those reviews and just see what other people are posting and just see what people are saying. I think if you read the reviews, you can kind of weed out the trolls from the real ones.
So the number one tip is see if someone has used a realtor. I mean, not a realtor, but a attorney before.
Yeah.
And if you can't do that, then Google reviews or, as you mentioned, like reviews on Avvo would be a good resource.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.